Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to transition from our conversation around defining religion to a discussion and conversation of two theorists, well-known theorists, a conversation around the question, why are people so incurably religious? So let's get started. Let me share my screen with you. And let's get this started. So, why are people religious? Now, there's many different answers that people could suggest, offer to this question. And today, in this lecture, we're just going to focus on listening to and then reflecting upon the answers of two theorists. All right, so let's get started. Why are people religious? All right, so the first author, the first scholar who provides a suggestion, an answer to the question, why are people religious, that we're going to discuss in our time together today, is Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. And so Freud, in a wide range of his works, such as Moses in Monotheism and other works of his, he often turns to the question, why are people religious? And he his overarching kind of conclusion is that people are religious because it's kind of a hangover from an earlier stage within the evolutionary process of the human being. He talks about in his new introductory lectures on psychoanalysis, published in 1933, he asserts that religion is an illusion and it derives its strength from the fact that it falls in with our instinctual desires. So for him, religion, it's an illusion and it's anchored to our instinctual desires. All right. So he doesn't have a kind of a strong appreciation of religion, but he kind of recognizes again that religion kind of belongs to our instinctual desires. It belongs to kind of our lesser developed parts of what it means to be a human being. Here in the work I've already mentioned, Moses and Monotheism, published in 1939, Sigmund Freud asserts if one attempts to assign to religion its place in man's evolution, it seems not so much to be a lasting acquisition as a parallel to the neurosis which the civilized individual must pass through on his way from childhood to maturity. So for Freud, religion belongs to this kind of infantile stage of human development, whereas the mature person is a person who's able to let go of religion and rise up to adulthood, right? So again, he equates the impulse to be religious to a neurosis, right? To kind of a psychological element. So that's Freud's perspective. He locates his answer to the question, why are people religious? It very much comes out of his understanding and his work as a psychoanalytic psychiatrist, psychologist, and it comes out of that location, his focus on the subconscious and what's occurring within our subconscious. Turning to Karl Marx, a Prussian philosopher, historian, and political theorist, rather than focusing on the subconscious as Freud does, and what's occurring in terms of our psychological makeup and our need through this neurosis to imagine, as Freud says, this kind of loving father figure that stands above and lowered over the universe, who's there to protect us and guide us. And so Freud, rather than understanding the religious impulse within the human being as a psychological deficiency, as Freud does, Marx tends to locate religion in terms of society. And he talks about religion serving as opiate for the masses. For Marx, what he wants is to see the working class, what he calls the proletariat. He wants to see the working class as being oppressed by those who have there are positions of authority, whether it be the government or the wealthy. He wants to see the working class rise up and revolt. He wants to see the working class rise up and have a revolution against these oppressive political and economic powers which are above them. But he asserts that the working class, in part, doesn't have the will to rise up because they've accepted that their social economic location is the will of God, and they're doing that because of their adherence to this Christian religion. In his context, the dominant religion in Prussia was Christianity. And so they're using this Christian religion in some ways as an opiate, something which keeps them in their social economic location, and not rising up and not revolting because they believe, due to their religious underpinnings, that God has them exactly where they're supposed to be. Marx argues in his work Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of the Right, published in 1843, that religious suffering is at the same time an expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. And it's that latter point, that religious suffering is a protest against real suffering, that concerned Karl Marx. Because when religious suffering doesn't allow for the full expression of authentic suffering, it might also curtail the desire to rise up and to revolt and to protest against those who are causing our suffering. And so Marx, in part, he is in conversation with the New Testament, this collection of writings which are part of the Christian tradition. He's in conversation, for example, the book of James, one of the 27 books within the Christian Bible or the New Testament, which asserts, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness." And so, and James continues and says, "Count it all joy when you suffer." If you turn to the Apostle Paul, who wrote 7 letters that are contained within the New Testament, he too says, "Consider it joy when you suffer, because Christ Jesus too suffered on the cross for the sake of our salvation." And so this kind of lifting up of suffering as being a part of God's plan for us within the Christian tradition, in that way it serves as an opiate. It serves to keep us at ease and to accept our lot in this life, and not to blame political powers or economic powers for our position in life, but to rather believe that any suffering and hardship we endure is part of God's plan and should be accepted as such. And that's what Marx says when he says religion is an opiate for the masses. And it's true, right? It's true that religion can be used by political authorities, by governments, to keep the masses kind of at bay, to keep the masses in their place. At the same time, it should be noted that within religious traditions, at least, for example, within the Jewish tradition, there's space for protest. There's space for shouting out in the face of suffering. And so Job famously, he shouts out to God in protest after his 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, who in the beginning of his suffering, after he loses his family, after he loses his property, after his life, breaks down into shambles, his friends come before him and they don't say a word, it says early in the book of Job, because they saw how great he was suffering. And then they all give theological speeches, his three friends, to try to explain his suffering. And then finally, we get to Job, who shouts out to God in protest, in authentic protest, because of the suffering he has endured, the loss of his family, the loss of his property, and so forth. And God renders it renders his protests authentic, and renders it just, and restores onto to Job everything he lost, and even more so on top of it. And thus you have within the Hebrew tradition, the Jewish tradition, this book coming out of the Hebrew Bible, of the Jewish tradition, you have Job modeling that there is something good in protests. There's something good in giving voice to our suffering, that is could be a part of that religious tradition. If you go from the Jewish tradition to the Christian tradition, likewise, you have this moment of authentic suffering on the cross, where Jesus, as he breathes his last, shouts out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And so again, you have this moment of authentic suffering within that tradition. So within religious traditions, you do have modeling religious suffering. At the same time, as Mark suggests, it's true that religion can be used by people in positions of political power or religious power, to kind of keep people in their place, and be okay with enduring some level of suffering, or perhaps injustice in their life. So Marx asserts in another of his works, that why are people religious? Because you have political institutions, religious authorities, that establish religion and use it and mobilize it to keep people in their place. Turning to his work on the social principles of Christianity, Marx looks over the history of Christianity, and he asserts the social principles of Christianity justified the slavery of antiquity, glorified the serfdom of the Middle Ages, and are capable, in case of need, of defending the oppression of the working class, the proletariat, with somewhat doleful grimaces. So for Marx, one of his chief complaints against Christianity and against religion, if you extend beyond Christianity, is that it is used often to reinforce social hierarchies and injustices throughout the world, such as, again, being used to reinforce the practice of slavery in antiquity. However, while it's true that religion can be used to reinforce social hierarchies and injustices and economic hierarchies within this world, likewise, religion can be used, understood, and mobilized to revolt and to encourage revolution amongst the poor, amongst the proletariat, to use Marx's language. So one example of that is in the case of Oscar Romero, who was Archbishop of San Salvador during the Salvadoran Civil War. Oscar Romero used the radio to preach sermons in which he called upon the Salvadoran army, which was at the bequest of the Salvadoran government, was going to war with the impoverished, with the poor, and was being used to oppress the poor. Romero preached against this because of his understanding of his religion. And so, from his perspective, he was able to use his understanding of his religion, the Christian tradition, as a vehicle of protest, to such an extent that the government ordered a death squad to assassinate Oscar Romero. Why? Because he was giving voice to the suffering of the poor within El Salvador. Oscar Romero predicted and recognized that he too potentially could be killed, like other priests among him within El Salvador, who prior to his assassination likewise were killed for standing alongside the poor and the oppressed. So religion does nothing on its own. It's true, as Marx suggests, religion can be used by people in positions of authority to keep others, those below them, in their place in the hierarchy, in the social economic hierarchy. At the same time, Religion can be used as the instrument to mobilize and inspire the poor towards revolt, towards resistance, towards creating a more just world for them and for their neighbor to inhabit. And so, why are people religious? There's many answers to that question. Freud offers a psychoanalytic answer by comparing our impulse to be religious to our natural instincts and to this kind of psychological neurosis, this need to project onto the universe this loving Father who cares for us. Why are we religious? For Marx, the answer lies within economic and religious hierarchies and within societies that have created religion as a way um, to keep the proletariat, to keep the working class in their social and economic location. All right, more could be said. I wanted to take this time to at least provide two suggestions from two different prominent theorists to the question, why are we religious? All right, we'll pick it up next time. Thank you so much and take care. All right, take care. Bye.